Hi, this is JT, and welcome to the instruction of the Glass Pierce X. And here is the creator of it, Chaow.
Hi guys. So thank you everyone buy the Glasper X. I'm really appreciate. Thank you so much. This fact from the 2023 and we developed so many versions and finally we have the final one, the Glasper X. And what it can do in the summer, winter, and inside room, even for the outside room, the whole season, you can perform and enjoy it. And I hope you guys like.
And before watching the instruction, I heard that there are a lot of precautions of it. And could you tell our friends about it?
Actually, they have 3 points before you using. So the first point, and before you using, please watch the whole tutorial finish. And I know it's a little bit hard, but please watch finish. And the second part is, we won't use it. Please don't twist that part. It's really weak. If you want open, just twist in the middle, just like that.
Twist on the edge of the lid, right?
Exactly. And the last part is the liquid. You can eat. You can't. 100% you can eat.
Yeah, you can't eat, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Now, let's have a look at what's inside the box. Inside the box, there are 5 elements. The first one is an injector, and inside the injector, that is the special liquid, special kind of ink. And this is our core gimmick. We will teach you how to use it later. The second part is a special tube. And actually, the tube consists of 2 compartments. This part is a tube, and it is for protecting the marker. If you want to use another product, this tube is perfect for protecting its gimmick part, okay? If you want to use the other product, and you can combine these 2 products to make it a longer routine. So this tube is for protecting the gimmick. Or you can use it to insert the marker. It's very convenient. And these 2 are 2 stamps. As we can see, that is 2 kinds of marks. One is a circle and the other one is a cross. You can use the special ink to have a test on your hand. By the way, these 2 stamps are for print the marks onto the spectator's hand. So you can take some special ink and test on your own hand, and you can see the shape. If you think the shape is too thin, you can use a piece of sandpaper to polish them. They are soft. So after polishing, the thickness of the marks will be thicker. So they look more like drawn on the hands. Okay? And these 2 tubes are for containing the special ink. And we will teach you how to use it in the setting part. And the third compartment is a whiteboard marker. So it is for vanish the mark on your side. So you just swipe and the mark will vanish. Finally, that is the filters. And we will teach you how to use the filters later. Now, let's have a look at the basic principle of this trick. To do this penetration effect, we need 2 methods. The first one is to make the mark on your side to be disappear. And the other one is to that the mark on the spectator's hand to appear. For the vanish, we use this whiteboard marker. So if we use the whiteboard marker to draw something on the glass, you just need to swap the glass and the mark will disappear. That's the vanish. For the appearance of the mark on the spectator's hand, we need to use this special kind of ink. This is the temperature-controlled ink. What does it mean? Because the spectator's hand is around 36 degrees, if you put this kind of ink on the hand, the ink will appear to be invisible or a little bit white. So that looks nothing on the hand. But if the ink touches the surface that is more than 5 degrees lower than your hand, such as the cold coffee, and the ink will appear to be black. Okay, so that's the principle of the appearance of the mark. So if we combine these two methods, that looks like a penetration. First, twist open the cap of the stamp. Open the syringe cap and use the syringe to add the gimmick liquid into the cap. Add a very few amount each time, about 0.3 ml. After a few refills, you get a feel for the right amount. At the beginning, it's better to use less rather than too much. First, spread it evenly in a circle, covering the bottom of the container, and then spread a thin layer around the inner wall. Don't apply too much. Then, use the tip of the syringe to pick up the filter pad and place it into the container. Apply another layer of liquid on top of the filter pad. Now the liquid is ready. After that, close the syringe cap so the liquid doesn't dry out. And finally, close the cap of the stamp. After the first refill, let it sit for a while, because the filter will absorb some of the liquid. Once it has settled, the liquid will stay in a much more stable condition during the future refills. Before performing, you need to check one thing. The stamp itself is white, but after the liquid is properly applied, the stamping area should appear black. If you see a little white edge, it means there isn't enough liquid. In that case, close the cap again and add a bit more liquid. Continue until the stamp becomes fully black, because that stamp represents how the transferred image will look on the hand. That's the first preparation method. Next is the second preparation method. This method is used when applying a larger amount of liquid and transferring the image with your finger. I will explain that in detail later. For this method, we don't use the filter pad. Just apply a bit more liquid, about the size of 4 to 5 grains of rice. Since the transfer is done with your finger, you need more liquid, so the liquid on the stamp will be thicker. If you are using this method without the filter pad and with a larger amount of liquid, try not to turn the container upside down. Otherwise, too much liquid may collect on the stamp and make the image unclear. Now I will demonstrate the finger transfer method. You simply touch the stamp lightly with your finger, and then you need to transfer it to the spectator's hand within 16 seconds. If you wait too long, the liquid may dry. After trying it a few times, you quickly get familiar with how the liquid behaves. Before performing, depending on your routine, you can place it on the edge of the table or keep it in your pocket. If the stamp has the filter pad inside, It can be placed in any orientation. But if you are not using the filter pad, it's better to keep it upright. Then you are ready to perform. There are two methods to load the image onto the spectator's hand. You can either keep the pen inside the tube or separate the pen from the tube. The tube is mainly there to keep the prop together as one piece. In your pocket, keep the pen vertical to prevent the liquid from turning upside down. Before performing, simply use your thumb and index finger to gently twist the stamp cap to unlock it. During the performance, twist it a little more to remove the stamp and secretly palm it between your index finger and your middle finger. Once it's hidden, find a reason to ask the spectator to raise their hand. This allows you to secretly load the ink onto their hand. It works just like the classic ash transfer principle. You can refer to the demonstration video filmed from the lower angle. Practice a bit so it looks natural. The most important thing is having a good reason. For example, asking the spectator to raise their hand. That way, the spectator won't notice the load at all. Next is the second loading method. First, stamp the ink onto your own finger. Then transfer it to the spectator's hand. For this method, you need slightly more ink. You need to experiment a bit to find the right amount. First, secretly press the stamp onto your own finger. You can use either your index finger or your thumb. Choose whichever finger feels more natural for you. Then you need to transfer the ink to the spectator's hand within 60 seconds. Otherwise, the ink may dry. I recommend using the index finger. It's usually more convenient. There are many possible routines with this prop, but if this is your first time using it and you are not familiar with how it behaves, I recommend starting with this one, making the mark penetrate onto your own hand. First, just like we explained earlier, gently twist open the stamp cap. Then check that stamp surface looks shiny and that no white areas are showing. Next, choose a spot on your hand, preferable a slightly warmer area, and lightly stamp the mark like this. The ink will slowly turn transparent or light gray. If your hand is cold and the mark doesn't turn gray, just breathe warm air onto it to heat the skin a little, and the mark will become invisible. If there's too much ink and the mark looks too thick, gently dab it with a tissue to make the line thinner. Even the ink dries a bit, that's fine. Just to make sure the design is complete. Now your secret preparation is done. During the performance, you need a piece of glass, like a glass tabletop. In the tutorial, we'll use this acrylic board for demonstration. Before performing, check the temperature of the glass. If it isn't cool enough, place a cold drink on it. After a moment, the glass will cool down. Once the temperature is right, draw a mark on one side of the glass. Then, place your hand over the glass and secretly wipe away the marker drawing. When the other hand, with the invisible ink, touches the glass, the mark appears. When showing the effect, make sure the audience first checks that the mark is not on this side, and only then move your hand away from under the glass. That way, it looks like the mark penetrated through the glass and appeared on the other hand. This ink has a special property. If your hand stays on the glass for 5 seconds, the image will appear on the hand for about 10 seconds. The visible time is about twice the time your hand stays on the glass. You can use this principle to control how long the mark remains visible. As your body temperature rises, the mark will gradually fade and eventually disappear. This effect can be repeated many times. Once the temperature rises again, you can immediately perform it again for another spectator. This prop allows for many routines, but this is the main one. The mark penetrates onto the spectator's hand. Before performing, first check the temperature of the spectator's hand. At normal body temperature, the liquid becomes invisible. But if the spectator's hand is cold, the mark won't disappear. So, before performing this effect, use other tricks to carefully check the spectator's hand temperature. For example, you could perform a witch hand routine or anything where you touch the spectator's hands. If their hand temperature feels similar to yours, you are ready to go. If their hands are cold, give them a warm drink to hold. After a short while, their hands will warm up and you can proceed with the effect. Now, let's assume the spectator's hand temperature is suitable. And as we said, better to keep the tube vertical in your pocket, so the liquid will not fall out. First, we need to load the mark onto the spectator's hand. Simply twist the stamp cap slightly and hide it between your fingers, just like we explained earlier. Then find a reason, for example, asking the spectator to raise their hand. This allows you to load the ink onto their hand. You can also use the other method we taught earlier. Stamp the ink onto your own finger first, then transfer it to the spectator's hand. The circle design is easier because orientation doesn't matter, but the X shape requires a bit more attention to angle. But with a little practice, both shapes are easy to control. Now the ink has been loaded onto the spectator's hand around this area. Next, use Magician's Choice to help them select the hand with the invisible ink. After they choose, ask them to hold their hand facing you. When their hand is facing you, they can't see what's on it, but you can clearly see where the mark is. Also, the pen hasn't appeared in front of the audience at all yet, so they have no idea what's about to happen. They won't even suspect that there's ink on their hand. Next, find a glass door. And here's an important detail. The magician stays outside the door. and the spectator stands inside because it's warmer inside. For this tutorial, let's imagine this is the outside of the glass door. Draw a circle here. It doesn't need to be perfect. Then the magician places their hand here and asks the spectator to place their hand on the other side. Next, rub the drawing a little and the mark you drew disappears. But make sure the spectator keeps their hand on the glass for at least 5 seconds. That way, when they remove their hand, the mark will remain visible for over 10 seconds. This gives them plenty of time to see the effect. Finally, you can let the spectator wipe the mark off themselves. This ink wipes off very easily. It even rolls off a bit like soft clay. Just a light rub and it's gone. Or just rub it lightly, and as their body temperature rises, the ink will fade away on its own. To the spectator, it feels like they removed it themselves. There's also an alternative ending for this routine. You can draw a mark on your own arm with a marker and cover it with your sleeve. Then wipe the mark off the spectator's hand and make it appear on your own arm, so the mark has traveled back to you, completing the effect. Here, we'll go into detail about how to deal with situations where the temperature isn't suitable. The main idea is to bring the spectator's hand up to normal body temperature, around 36 degrees, while making sure the glass surface is at least 5 degrees cooler than the spectator's hand. In winter, the glass is usually already cold enough, so there's no need to adjust its temperature. But if the spectator's hand is too cold, give them a hot drink to hold. After a short while, their hand will return to normal body temperature. There's also a simpler option. Perform the effect in reverse, like in the first routine, and transfer the mark onto your own hand. Make sure your hand is warm. Then stamp the mark onto your own hand so it becomes invisible there. Then give the marker to the spectator and ask them to draw a mark. After that, have the spectator wipe away the mark, and it will penetrate through to your own hand. This is the safest and most reliable version of the effect. In summer, the spectator's hands are usually warm, so you don't need to worry about their temperature. You only need to pay attention to the temperature of the glass. If there's air conditioning indoors, the glass will normally be more than 5 degrees cooler than the spectator's hand, so you can perform the routine normally. If the glass is too warm, place a cold drink on it, or use a cooling spray to lower the temperature. Cooling spray is the kind of commonly used in summer to cool down and refresh. Once the glass surface temperature drops, you can perform the routine as usual. Next, let's talk about how much liquid to add, because the amount of liquid will affect the performance. When adding liquid for the first time, the filter will absorb some of it, so you may need to add a little more, but the volume of 2 grains of rice. After that, each refill only needs about 1 grain of rice in volume. The exact amount varies from person to person, so you need to experiment and find the quantity that works best for you. After each refill, you can usually perform the effect around 10 to 15 times. That estimate is based on stamping directly onto the spectator's hand. If you use the finger transfer method, you use more liquid because some will left on your own finger. In that case, each refill may only last 5 to 8 performances. Also remember that each time you add liquid, spread it evenly, tighten the cap, and let it sit for a while so the liquid can distribute evenly across the stamp. Another thing to keep in mind is that the liquid may dry out. Normally, this doesn't happen, but if you haven't used it for a long time and the liquid dries out, what should you do? When the liquid dries, it forms a crust, which is actually very easy to remove. If the liquid on the syringe tip dries, it will form a crust on the tip, while the liquid inside the syringe will still remain wet. You simply need to remove the crust from the tip. In fact, once it dries and forms a crust, it actually helps seal the syringe. But what if the liquid inside the stamp dries out? Sometimes a small amount of liquid may seep along the threads and dry both inside and outside, forming crusts. In that case, take two tissues and grip the edge of the cap through the tissues. The tissues increase friction, making the cap much easier to unscrew. But be very careful. The little handle on top is very fragile. Never twist the little handle, or it may break. Always twist the edge of the cap instead. If it still won't open, simply apply more force and twist harder. It will eventually come loose. If it still won't open, gently scrape off the outer crust with a blade first, and then try again. Once the cap is open, remove all the crust, add the liquid as usual, and the prop will be ready to perform again. Next, let's talk about the pressure used when stamping. Pressing too hard or too lightly can affect the result. So, how much pressure should you use? First, unscrew the cap and check how evenly the liquid is distributed. With the filter installed, the liquid is usually very even. Next, test the pressure on your own hand. If you press very hard, the mark will become large and thick. Sometimes the mark can even become hollow because the liquid gets pushed to the sides of the stamp. So when stamping, don't press too hard. Just give it a light tap. Let me demonstrate again. Tighten the cap and make sure the liquid is properly prepared. Then simply tap lightly. Just one light tap, and the design will be thin and complete. Now we'll use the cooling spray to review the mark so you can compare. The first one, where we pressed too hard, becomes hollow. The other one is just right and looks more like it was drawn with a pen. So each time, just tap lightly. At the beginning, you can practice using the version where the mark transfers onto your own hand. This effect can even be repeated in a loop. This is very interesting because if you perform this version where the mark transfers onto your own hand, the liquid stays on your hand, allowing you to repeat the effect as long as it hasn't been rubbed off. If you perform the version where the mark transfers onto the spectator's hand, after the effect, you can ask the spectator to close their hand again. Their hand will warm up, and after a while, the mark will become invisible again. Before the performance, you can draw a mark on your elbow with a marker and cover it with your sleeve so the audience cannot see it. But as soon as you extend your arm forward, the mark will become visible. At the moment where the spectator's mark disappears, pretend to grab it and toss it back onto your arm. Then review the mark on your hand, showing that it has returned to you. This makes it look like the mark has transferred for a second time. If you like, you can extend this into a full 5-minute routine. It all depends on your own preference. This prop has also been specially adapted for use with double cross. You can combine it with double cross to create a much longer routine. Our product design even includes a protection feature for the double cross gimmick. When I used the first generation of double cross, I would usually do it this way. Because the air pressure, sometimes removing the cap would accidentally pull out the gimmick as well. This is risky and easily damage the gimmick. So on this tube, we added a pressure release value at this position. This pressure release feature makes it much easier to remove the cap and prevents damage to double cross gimmick, perfectly protecting it. If you want to extend the routine, you can first perform the double cross effect and transfer the mark to the spectator's hand, and then perform our penetration effect. This turns it into a very strong 5-minute routine, and the routine is extremely viral. Since the audience already understands the idea of a mark transferring, the second phase feels more natural and also escalates the effect. Another advantage is that while performing double cross, you can feel the spectator's hand temperature, allowing you to decide whether the penetration phase will work properly, or whether you need to adjust the temperature, or even decide whether to perform the second phase at all.